The year was around 1822, and the fog rolled through the marshlands of Maryland like a ghost haunting the earth. In a small wooden cabin, barely large enough to hold a family, a child took her first breath. That breath did not belong to her. Not her cradle, not her life, not even her name. Everything belonged to the plantation. Her birth name was Araminta Ross, and she was called Minty. But history would not remember that name. History would remember her as Harriet Tubman, a woman whose footsteps shook the foundations of slavery, a woman whose courage rose higher than the chains that tried to break her. She was born into bondage. Before she could speak, before she could walk, before she understood the world declared ownership over her body. That is the brutality of slavery. It captures you before you even know who you are. Harriet's family lived under constant fear of being sold, fear of punishment, fear of the master's anger, fear of losing each other forever. Every day was a battle simply to stay together. Her mother, Harriet Green, fought fiercely to protect her children. Her father, Ben Ross, taught her resilience, survival, and a quiet sense of dignity. But dignity meant nothing to those who claimed ownership. From the moment she could lift her hands, Harriet was put to work. She trapped muskrats in freezing rivers, carried heavy logs through fields, and endured the cruel commands of overseers who viewed her as a tool, not a child. Those early years carved strength into her bones. Hardship became her companion. Pain became her teacher. But deep inside her young heart, a fire burned, a fire that no master, no overseer, no chain could extinguish. Even as a child, Harriet showed signs of extraordinary will. She listened to the stories of Moses from the Bible, a man who led his people out of slavery, and something stirred within her spirit. She did not understand it yet, but destiny had begun to whisper her name. One day, destiny came crashing down in a brutal way. Harriet was still a girl when an overseer hurled a heavy iron weight at another enslaved boy who tried to escape. Harriet stepped between them. The iron slammed into her skull. People said she would die, but she did not. She survived, though forever changed. The injury caused seizures, headaches, and strange visions. Harriet fell into sudden sleeps, saw powerful dreams, and experienced moments of intense spiritual clarity. She believed these visions were messages from God, instructions, warnings, guidance. She could have been broken by the injury. Instead, she was awakened. Her mind opened to a calling greater than herself, a destiny larger than the life she had known. And though she was still a child, the path of Harriet Tubman had already begun. As Harriet grew older, the grip of slavery tightened like a vice. Every year brought new traumas, new losses, new reminders that freedom was a distant dream. Slaveholders saw her strength and pushed her even harder. She worked the fields, the forests, the marshes. She was hired out to cruel strangers for labor, beaten for exhaustion, whipped for mistakes she didn't make. The scars on her back became a map of suffering, a map that marked every moment the world tried to break her spirit. But it could not. Her resolve only grew stronger. Yet there was one thing she feared more than pain: being sold. Slaveholders often sold enslaved people to faraway states in the Deep South. When someone was sold, the goodbye was permanent. Families shattered, children ripped from mothers, husbands torn from wives. A lifetime bond destroyed in an instant. No one knew who would be sold next. Harriet lived in constant dread of that moment. In 1849, the rumors became real. Harriet heard that she might soon be sold. She felt the cold weight of fear settle in her chest. But she also felt something else. The fiery voice of destiny urging her to make a choice. Slavery demanded her obedience. Destiny demanded her courage. So she chose courage. Harriet Tubman prepared to escape, not with a grand plan, not with wealth, not with safe supplies, but with pure faith and unshakable determination. She took only what she could carry, whispered quiet goodbyes to the shadows of her cabin, and walked into the night. She did not know the path. She did not know who she could trust. But she knew one thing: she would not die a slave. The forest welcomed her with darkness. The rivers challenged her with cold waters. The slave catchers hunted her with dogs, horses, and guns. But Harriet kept moving, guided by the North Star, guided by her visions, guided by a belief that God had placed a road before her even if she could not yet see it. She walked miles each night, hid during the day, and followed secret paths offered by brave abolitionists. Rain soaked her. Hunger tormented her. Sleep called to her like a dangerous siren, but she did not stop. Every step was a rebellion. Every breath was an act of war against slavery. And then one morning, after nearly 90 miles of danger, the world opened before her. She had crossed into Pennsylvania. She was free. The air smelled different. The sunlight felt different. The ground beneath her feet felt like it finally belonged to her. Later she would say, "I felt like I was in heaven." But Harriet Tubman did not remain in heaven for long. For freedom meant nothing to her if her family still lived in chains. She had crossed the line once alone. Now she would cross it again and again, for others. Freedom transformed Harriet from a survivor into a warrior. Most escaped slaves never dared return. The South was a land of death for runaways. Slave catchers, armed patrols, dogs, and the law itself waited like predators. But Harriet Tubman refused fear. She joined the Underground Railroad, a secret network of abolitionists and safe houses that helped enslaved people escape. But Harriet wasn't just another helper. She became its most legendary conductor. Her missions were daring, dangerous, and brilliantly planned. She studied the land with the sharpness of a general. She memorized roads, rivers, hiding places, and plantation layouts. She knew where patrols marched and how to move unseen. But even more powerful was her ability to sense danger. Some called it instinct. Some called it intelligence. Harriet called it divine guidance. She believed God spoke to her through visions and dreams, and whether one believes it or not, there is no denying this truth. Her intuition saved lives. Between 1850 and 1860, she returned to the South at least 13 times, rescuing around 70 people directly and guiding hundreds more indirectly. She freed her brothers. She freed her parents. She freed children, elders, strangers, entire families. And she never not once lost a single person she led. That alone made her a legend. She carried a pistol, not for violence but to prevent anyone from turning back. She knew that one frightened person could ruin a mission, cause others to be captured, or reveal routes under torture. Harriet looked them in the eye and said, "You'll be free or you'll die." She meant it, not as a threat but as a vow. During escapes, she sang spirituals as coded messages. "Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go." People listened. People followed. People believed. Because Harriet Tubman was more than a conductor. She was a liberator, a guide, prophet, a warrior. Slaveholders feared her. Enslaved people revered her. Abolitionists admired her. They called her Moses, the woman who led her people from bondage toward the Promised Land. But Harriet was not finished. Her greatest battles lay ahead. By the early 1860s, the United States exploded into the Civil War, the deadliest conflict the nation would ever face. The war was not just between North and South. It was a war between freedom and slavery, between oppression and justice. Harriet Tubman did not sit aside. She marched straight into the heart of history. She joined the Union Army first as a nurse, tending to the wounded and comforting the dying. She saw fields covered in blood, soldiers crying out for mothers who would never hear them again, and the horrifying cost of war. But Harriet's mind was sharp. Her knowledge of the South was unmatched. Her bravery was limitless. The Union officers began to see her not as a nurse, but as a weapon. She became a scout, spy, and strategist. She gathered intelligence from enslaved people, infiltrated hostile territories, and led scouting missions into the Confederate South. And then, in 1863, she did something no woman in American history had ever done. She led an armed military raid. The Combahee River Raid. Harriet guided Union soldiers through river channels filled with hidden mines. She slipped past enemy lines. She moved like a shadow through the hostile terrain she knew so well. When the operation began, she marched at the front. Plantations burned. Bridges collapsed. Supply lines fell. And more than 700 enslaved people ran toward Union boats toward freedom. Harriet Tubman stood there, not as a slave, not as a runaway, not as a conductor, but as a commander. Her voice rose above the chaos, urging the terrified families forward. She was their Moses, again, but this time with an army behind her. The Civil War raged on, consuming cities, swallowing fields, and drowning the nation in blood. But through that storm, Harriet Tubman stood firm, a woman without rank, without official command, yet possessing something that no uniform or badge could give: authority born from sacrifice. Soldiers spoke her name with respect. Generals trusted her intelligence more than maps. Enslaved people saw her as salvation itself. Harriet did what few dared to do. She walked through danger as if danger were merely another obstacle to step over. While Union officers planned operations from tents and tables, Harriet moved through the land itself. She crossed rivers with crocodiles lurking beneath the surface. She trekked through swamps filled with mosquitoes thick as smoke. She listened to whispers in slave quarters. She gathered secrets from those who lived under Confederate rule. She learned where enemy troops hid, which roads were safe, which plantations stored weapons, which bridges could cripple the Confederate supply chain. Her insights were priceless. But Harriet Tubman did not ask for payment. She asked for victory because victory meant freedom. Her life became a battlefield long before the war began. Now, it was simply a larger stage, a wider field on which she played the role she was born to play. But even as she served the Union Army, she saw hypocrisy. She saw black soldiers paid less than white ones. She saw generals hesitant to give her the recognition she deserved. She saw a nation fighting for freedom while still shackled by prejudice. Yet she did not turn away. Her mission was not for glory, not for applause, not for money. Her mission was for people, for the enslaved who still cried in the night, for the mothers who feared their children would be sold, for the men whose bodies bowed under chains, for the women whose names history might never remember. Harriet Tubman carried their hopes on her shoulders, and she would carry them until her final breath. When the Civil War ended in 1865, the nation celebrated the collapse of the Confederacy. Slavery, the monstrous system that had devoured millions of lives, was finally declared illegal. Chains dropped, auction houses closed, whips fell silent. But Harriet Tubman knew the truth. Freedom on paper was not freedom in life. Enslaved people were now free, yet homeless, landless, jobless, stateless, and surrounded by the same people who had once owned them. Harriet Tubman returned home to Auburn, New York, where she had settled years before. It should have been a moment of peace, a chance to rest, to breathe, to let her tired bones heal. But Harriet was not a woman built for rest. She looked around and saw injustice still thriving. She saw freedmen struggling to survive. She saw veterans ignored, injured, forgotten. She saw elderly black people dying with no homes, no care, no dignity. So she did what she always did. She fought. Harriet Tubman devoted the rest of her life to building, supporting, lifting, healing. She worked multiple jobs, cooking, farming, selling vegetables just to raise money for others. She opened her doors to anyone who needed shelter. Her home became a sanctuary for the poor, the broken, the abandoned. People called her a hero, but Harriet shrugged at the word. Heroes, she believed, were those who endured, who carried burdens, who survived injustice and still found the strength to help others. She had simply followed the path God had set before her. But that path was not easy. Even after all she had done, freeing slaves, guiding soldiers, leading a military raid, she received no military pension, no government support, no recognition from the nation she had helped save. Poverty shadowed her. Yet she never complained. When her own money ran out, she borrowed. When borrowing failed, she sold her own land. And when she had nothing left, she prayed and somehow found enough to keep going. Because Harriet Tubman had never fought for herself. She fought for humanity. As the 19th century moved toward its close, a new storm rose across America: the struggle for women's rights. Women demanded the right to vote, to own property, to stand equal in the eyes of the law. Harriet Tubman had always been a warrior for freedom, but now she stepped into an entirely new battlefield. She joined the suffragist movement, standing beside powerful voices like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, but Harriet's presence was unlike any other. She was not a wealthy woman. She was not a politician. She did not speak in elegant phrases or polished speeches. She spoke from the battlefield, from the plantations, from the scars on her body, from the years of walking through darkness with only faith to guide her. When Harriet Tubman stood before crowds, people listened not because she wanted them to, but because she spoke with the authority of lived truth. She said, "I fought for my liberty and my people's liberty. And if I could fight for that, I can fight for women's rights." Her voice was strong. Her presence was undeniable. Her words, simple yet powerful, cut through doubt like a blade. But still, she faced discrimination even within the suffrage movement. Some leaders hesitated to share the stage with a black woman. Some believed her stories were too harsh, too raw, too uncomfortable for audiences. But Harriet did not need a spotlight. Her legacy was already carved into history. She walked into meetings with the same fearless spirit she carried on her underground missions. She spoke about equality not as an idea, but as a necessity, as a moral duty. She fought for a future she knew she might never see. But she fought anyway, because Harriet Tubman believed that freedom was not complete until everyone, men, women, black, white, shared equal power. In her later years, Harriet Tubman's own health began to fail. The seizures and headaches from her childhood injury never left her. But weakness never stopped her. When she saw elderly black people struggling, starving, abandoned, pushed aside by society, she made a decision that defined the final chapter of her life. She built the Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged. It was not funded by the government. It was not built with wealthy donors. It came from Harriet's own hands. She sold vegetables. She borrowed money. She bought land. She gathered help from friends. She poured every ounce of strength into creating a place where the forgotten could live with dignity. The home became a refuge, a place of warmth, of safety, of love. Elderly people who had worked their entire lives found rest there. People who had been rejected by society were welcomed like family. And Harriet Tubman was there every day, cooking, cleaning, caring, praying. She did not lead from afar. She led from the front, as she always had. Even in old age, she remained a warrior. Time, the undefeated enemy, finally began to close its grip around Harriet Tubman. Her body weakened, her vision dimmed, but her spirit remained fierce. People traveled from across the country just to meet her, to hear her voice, to feel the presence of a woman whose courage had reshaped the world. Harriet, however, never boasted. She never bragged. She spoke of her life with humility, as if she had simply done what any human being should do. But the truth was this: no one else had done what she had done. Not then. Not ever. As Harriet Tubman lay in her final days at her home for the aged, surrounded by those she had saved and those she had served, she spoke her last words. "I go to prepare a place for you. A warrior's farewell. A liberator's blessing. Prophet's final promise." And then, in 1913, the world lost one of its greatest heroes. But her legacy did not die. Harriet Tubman did not leave behind wealth. She did not leave behind buildings or empires. She did not leave behind medals or monuments, not in her lifetime. What she left behind was something far greater: a blueprint for courage, a roadmap for resistance, a legacy that outlives time itself. She became a symbol of freedom around the world. Her story is taught in schools. Her name is engraved in museums. Movies, books, documentaries all honor her courage. She showed humanity that a single person, even one born in chains, can rise above oppression and change the world. She proved that freedom is worth every sacrifice. She proved that bravery is not born in comfort. She proved that one woman, fueled by faith and fire, could face an empire and win. Harriet Tubman remains one of the greatest Americans who ever lived. A woman of iron will, a warrior of God, a liberator of her people. Her footsteps still echo. Her spirit still guides. Her name still stands unshaken. Harriet Tubman, the woman who walked through darkness so others could walk in light.